Today we're going to talk about conspiracy theories. Let's jump in. So, my first one is the mysterious case of Gloria Ramirez. What's interesting about this is this actually happened in the early 90s. I feel like a lot of times with medical mysteries, it's like, oh, okay, this happened in like the 1800s. Is this legit? Is this like overfabricated? Maybe they were dumbasses. They didn't know what they're talking about. You know what I mean? This is like the 90s. So that's why it's like extra weird, that it was so mysterious. So Gloria, she had late stage cancer, which is what she ended up coming into the hospital for. So that on itself wasn't very odd, but she was kind of delusional, a little out of it, definitely, towards her final stages here. When she first came in, they tried to sedate her, and then that started feeling, so they did end up defibrillating her.
Oh, okay.
And they started to notice, like, after they defibrillated her, that she kind of had, like, this oily sheen, and she smelled both fruity and, like, garlic, which is just, like, an odd combination, personally. But, let's see here. So they did attempt to draw her blood at that point in time, and there was, like, weird little, like, particles in her blood.
Like what?
Like, just particles. That's what's weird. Like, nobody has, like, things in their blood that you can visually see without, like, a microscope. And her blood smelled like ammonia, which is also, like, just incredibly weird. To top that off, in this hospital, they ended up having to evacuate it and run it on a skeletal staff. They evacuated the patients too. 23 people became ill. Out of those, 5 had to be hospitalized, and 1 person was in the ICU for 2 weeks. Let's see here. So after that all happened, 34 of the staff that were working that night were interviewed, and some of the more common things about, like, the people that were sick was they were, like, lightheaded, they were dizzy. And there's a case where one woman started to become kind of faint, so she left. She was attending to Gloria. She, like, left, went out kind of, like, to the main area, was talking to one of her coworkers, another nurse, and before she could kind of finish her thought about, like, oh, I don't feel so well, like, the other woman, like, fainted. Like, they were both got ill from it, from some exposure. So they did have, like, the police and, like, the health association, everybody came in, kind of, like, investigated this. Again, like, they interviewed 34 people. And they noticed it was mostly women that were affected by this. And they did do, like, blood tests, that sort of thing, on the people that were affected. And there was, like, nothing in their blood. It wasn't like, oh, you smelled something that made you sick. So this is kind of like the shitty thing. And it's like, okay, I guess, like, the 90s weren't that progressive. It has been some time now. Since then, it feels like it hasn't. But they literally suggested, they were like, well, it was a bunch of women that just all fainted. It was mass hysteria. And it's like, these are professional women who went to medical school. Like, I don't think they're just, oh, freaking out, oh man, you fainted. It's like, these are smart women. They know what's going on. They're not just gonna, like, succumb to that, especially, like, I think working in a hospital, working in an emergency center, the people that work there have to have very strong nerves. They're not the kind of people that are going to freak out because they have to maintain their cool in order to care for the people that are coming in there. So I find that suggestion incredibly ridiculous and honestly kind of offensive, especially because I feel like that was based off of the gender of those affected. They did do some other research, and there are 2 theories on what may have actually happened other than the very stupid mass hysteria thing.
Okay.
So the official approved thing, which I still find incredibly wild, is that some people apparently use, like, a degreaser, like, found in a hardware store, to, like, soothe their pain, which, I don't know, maybe this is, like, a super common thing, but for me that sounds incredibly odd. Um, Especially for women, I feel like that'd be more something that like a man would maybe try to do if he had cancer. Maybe that's kind of sexist. I don't know, but I just find it weird that someone just like lube themselves up with degreaser. But their theory behind it was that the chemicals in that had reacted to the sedatives and it had reacted to the defibrillator, and it created like a different chemical reaction, and then that was in the air, and that's what they were smelling, because a lot of people who have used this claim that it has a garlic taste, hence the garlic smell, and that with that, some of that chemical compound does like crystallize at a cooler temperature, and so after her blood was drawn, potentially those were the particles in it, being it was a cooler room, and then those fumes were what people were like passing out from. But and then also that would explain why she was kind of oiled up, why she had that oily sheen. My problems with this theory, though, are number one, someone comes into like the hospital emergency room. I feel like you would notice if they were oiled up right away. It wouldn't be like after several things were done. Like, I understand there's a lot of crazy things happening and everything, but again, these are professionals that are trained for this scenario. They have to notice things like this. Like, these things are important to adequately make sure stuff like those chemical reactions don't happen. And I feel like if that was like a known thing, like that people were just like degreasing themselves as like a way to ease pain for cancer, that would be more like, oh, okay, let's maybe like keep this in the back of our minds. And out of like the 10 or 15 people that were directly assisting her, you would think that one of them would have noticed that sooner rather than just like, huh, she seems a little oily now. I felt like it was portrayed more like that happened after she had showed up, that she kind of had that sheen on her. Another thing is if she was lubing herself up, why is she eating it? Like, is she only eating it, or is she like lubing herself up with it? Like, why is there a garlic taste? And that doesn't explain the fruity aroma. That doesn't explain the ammonia smell. And that also doesn't explain, okay, so if there was an actual chemical that these people were inhaling, why did it not show up in their blood tests if it was so strong and concentrated in her and built up in her system that there was actual particles? And yet it wasn't tested on a single other person when they did these blood tests? And I also feel like this kind of goes back to the whole, like, I mean, this isn't explained with either theory, but like the fact that mostly women were affected. It's like, is this compound specifically known to only affect women? Like, that's weird. I feel like chemicals don't really react like that a lot, at least not in these situations.
Yeah.
But that's the official theory. That's like the official thing that the government has issued. After all, once they kind of denied the mass hysteria, which I still think was very stupid on their part to even initially suggest that. So the second theory, and this is where it gets interesting, is that this town that Gloria lived in was a big hub for meth. And they think that there was some people, some of the hospital staff, that were involved in like drug smuggling. And so there wasn't any actual like meth on site, but they believe that there may have been like ingredients to make meth that was being smuggled through the hospital via IV bags.
Oh.
Which kind of makes sense. I feel like if you were to do such things, that would go very unnoticed. There's lots of things coming in and out. You go through a lot of supplies. I don't think that would be crazy. And then on top of it, some of those chemicals used to make meth do have an ammonia smell. So their theory behind that is that one of those bags that had meth ingredients was used as an IV for Gloria rather than an actual IV drip. And that's what kind of like caused everything to like spiral out of control. Those were like weird little meth particles in her blood. Because again, they're like directly injecting her with this shit.
Oh my god.
And it has an ammonia smell, and that would explain why her blood had an ammonia smell.
Yeah.
So again, that's like a little far-fetched, and it doesn't explain the whole gender thing again.
I feel like that's way more plausible.
But yeah, that seems more plausible than like someone's just eating some degreaser and it somehow affects everybody, but also leaves no traces in their blood. Whereas like one person being affected by meth. I mean, again,
and it's like obviously now that like they have her open, it's like that can get into the air, right?
Right. Well, that's another thing too. So they were very quick to kind of just like bury her body, like a lot, like the way they try to do a toxicology report and all that stuff after someone passes. It was very like contaminated. It wasn't done very thoroughly, and they were very quick to just kind of like bury her up, get their hands clean with that, and kind of move on with their like official statement. Um, her family themselves, they didn't buy into it. So I also find that interesting that like her family was like, I don't feel like she was eating and lubing up with degreaser, you know. So I find that interesting that they tried to have her exhumed and re-examined, but at that point, she was past that point. She was kind of decomposed a little bit. And this was a fairly fast turnaround, like within a week or two. So again, I feel like it was odd that they were so quick to bury her in the first place before everything was kind of finalized. Especially when her family like could have suggested that early that they wanted that double checked, and that it was kind of
knew exactly what happened.
Right. So I feel like that definitely I'm leaning more towards theory number 2 personally. Again, because I find it odd that this was all like, oh, they didn't notice that she had stuff on her. They didn't notice this, that, and the other thing until after all these effects. Whereas it makes more sense where it would take a little bit of time after you've injected somebody and then they start kind of having all this illness and extended symptoms. Another thing that is also interesting, her actual like cause of death was liver failure.
Oh damn.
They attributed it, to her cancer, but her actual like cause of death was liver failure.
Because they injected her with poison.
Right. So that's my little thing about Gloria Ramirez.
Holy crap, Gloria! I'm so sorry.
I know.
Like the big drug cartels had like a big like thing going through the hospital or something.
Right. That's especially because of how prevalent drugs are in our community and how high up that goes and how much that's covered up. I definitely find that much more plausible than some random person just like testing out degreaser, like nobody noticed. I think that's the thing that catches me is it's like it wasn't like there was only one person attending her at a time. There was like a team, it's always a unit that comes in and nobody noticed a sheen on her.
Right.
I would have like right away been like, is this flammable? Is this this? Is this that? Like you need to know that before you start like doing things to somebody. That's very important. I feel like that's one of the first things I ask somebody if they come in. I mean, obviously she had cancer, so maybe they didn't get too in-depth in questions. But, someone comes in, it's like, what did you take? What were you around? Who were you with? What's going on? This isn't a police report. This is strictly so we know how to help you, And I would also find, I guess she was kind of out of it. But you'd still think there'd be some, like, how out of it was she really if she was able to, like, move herself
clean
up?
her body or something, right?
Right. I find that odd. I find that not completely lining up, especially when the government was so quick to jump on this hysteria theory before people complained. Like the one woman who was in the ICU for 2 weeks, she was like, "That I wasn't faking that." She's like, "I'm a medical professional. I was cared for by other medical professionals. I have like medical records. I was in the intensive care unit, seriously ill for 2 weeks." Like,
because she was basically exposed to a meth lab.
Right, and they're trying to claim that it was hysteria before backpedaling and saying, oh, well, maybe it was some degreaser that nobody had ever heard of. And now that is actually in some medical texts saying that, like, people could use degreaser and then this chemical goes from, like, O1 to O2 to O3 to O4. That's, like, 4 chemical reactions.
Can you imagine if, like, the government let out, like, oh, a drug cartel was sophisticated enough to intercept
the
our
local,
hospitals and
right. I feel like they totally would have covered that up if they knew that. So
definitely, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know like how sophisticated these drug cartels actually are.
For real, right? I mean, they've been around a while. They've got connections. They know what they're doing. Honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I've got some here too. What should I start with? I should probably start off a little bit small because some of these, yeah, I know. Some of these connect with each other, kind of, and so I'll start off with like, I don't know, just like that. Okay, so there's this theory of like we're not actually from planet Earth and we're actually the aliens on this planet, and it makes some sense, and then we've already seen like movies and videos of this kind of stuff, so it's just crazy. So I'm gonna go into that a little bit. So I don't know if any of you've seen the movie like Prometheus. That movie kind of goes into how like there's this other human species that's a little bit bigger, a little bit taller than us, and they genetically created us, and then they put us on this planet because it was similar to their home planet. Because for whatever the reason, I think their home planet was dying, or I don't know. But anyway, so there's that theory that goes into that, and then there's also like a whole lot of other theories of like genetic manipulation from like other aliens coming in down to our planet, and then like that's where the theory of like why we evolved from monkeys so fast, and science was a little confused on why that was happening. Um, so it's like that was also a theory as well, and then so then we kind of get into like I don't know. That's like kind of a small one.
I can build off of that. I saw a theory similar-ish. It's more about like souls not necessarily being from here. That aliens built Saturn's rings specifically to like suck in like spiritual energies and then like be able to direct them. So their theory is that when we die, our souls are then recaptured by Saturn.
What?
And put back into people as like reincarnation. But we specifically have to go to Saturn to get like our minds wiped from our past life before we can be reincarnated.
What?
It's more in depth, but that's just what I remember off the top of my head.
Oh my god. Yeah, there's a lot of theories on like I feel like a lot of people kind of have that connection of like I'm not really from here.
Right.
And it's like it kind of makes sense if you think about it. It's like how much of our environment actually you have to recope for. Like you have to exfoliate and moisturize your skin like all the time, otherwise you get wrinkles or you get acne or other things. Or you have to eat all these like other healthy things which aren't really accessible everywhere. You know, it's like
right.
so, and then also like the atmosphere. It's like it's not perfect everywhere. I mean, and even in like let's say for example the rainforest, I'd probably get pretty close, but
Well, even in the rainforest, if there is like a monsoon season or something along those lines where there's like pretty much water covering the ground, like our bodies cannot be exposed to long-term water.
right,
That was like really proven in World War I, where people's feet would literally get eaten away
exactly.
just by the water, and they just have like stumps. It was kind of gross.
So it's like honestly, this environment on planet Earth doesn't seem perfect for us, and so it's like I can see why some people would be like, well, how are we here? So it's like in like the terms of like the Prometheus one, it's like in my theory, it's like in terms if you're gonna go with like they took the DNA from the ape, I think it's like obviously there was some sort of necessary DNA that they acquired from the ape to allow us to survive on this atmosphere in this planet if they actually came because I think I have a note in here.
Or like a common ancestor.
Well, like I'm gonna get into like lizard people here in a second, and there was an interview with the lizard person where she kind of goes into detail of like the war on. Anyway, but like where she goes, it's like there's the alien race was called. It was like a human race that looked a little different than us, and they were from a galaxy called um, Procyon. And so that's interesting. I don't know exactly where that's at, but like basically, so if let's say that they came from that galaxy away, and that planet is like, let's say, a perfect atmosphere where it's humid enough to where your skin gets enough moisture from the atmosphere and there's nutrients in there because it's balanced enough, flowing enough, and you get enough sun from your suns or whatever.
I also find it incredibly odd how harsh the sun is.
Well, yeah.
For humans.
And we'll get into that.
But at the same time, it's like you can't be out in the sun for that long. Even with protective gear, it's really like recommended you aren't in the sun that much,
right.
Honestly. Even with like full sunscreen, fully like clothed up. But on top of that, it's like we're also, if you're not in the sun, you start to die from a lack of vitamin D. Like,
so you need like a little bit, but you can't have too much. And it's like,
just
how did
seems too close.
Well, it's like, how did we evolve like just undercover all the time. It doesn't make sense, but maybe I don't know.
And it feels like everywhere just has extreme temperatures. There's nowhere that's like, I mean, maybe there's some places legitimately that are like mild all year, but it feels like if you think of certain states, even it's like okay, if you go to Arizona, it is blazing hot in the summer, you know. But you know during the winter maybe it's nicer. But then here in Minnesota, it's like -30 sometimes. Like I understand people are originally like nomadic and everything, but it also just seems like a lot.
It does
Just seems
because
like
I
a
just
lot.
feel like if the I don't know. But anyway, so if like there was this better atmosphere and a better planet that was better suited for humans, it would kind of make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that they came here, that's one that's kind of suitable, but then they, genetically manipulated us so we could survive here. Because, I mean, my theory is this is like if you are an advanced human race and you're going to go colonize the galaxy, you're going to go colonize the galaxy regardless. And so,
Mm-hmm.
honestly, if that's what's going to happen, that's what's going to happen, and that's probably what happened. And so, I'll get a little bit more into that and some other topics, but that's kind of one theory is like we're not actually from here. This is not our home planet. We're actually
Definitely.
the aliens.
Definitely. I also find it interesting that like there really is no like direct competitor in terms of for humans. I mean, like not saying we don't have other things in the food chain, but just like yes, there are plenty of animals that are incredibly intelligent. And dolphins have similar intelligence, but it's also like are dolphins building like physical like sea scrapers? You know what I mean? I find it odd. I feel like if you look at dogs and cats and like other animals that have similar like mental capacity, they have like they have like their burrows and their homes and they have similar like social constructs and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it odd that we don't have anyone similar, especially because I firmly believe. I mean, I have spirituality and everything coming into this, but I also feel like we are all created, here. And I find it odd that it's like, oh, this one random species is so much smarter than everything else and can create all these things. I find that very odd. I would like almost expect like other animals and stuff to be of similar kind of competence or close enough,
Yeah.
like maybe we're like the dominant ones,
like in Narnia, where all the animals talk to you.
right. I find that odd that there's nothing that's even close to having built what we have built as a society, as humans.
Yeah, I agree. So it's just like how. Yeah. Well, then there's also all of that stuff where it's like, there's been multiple civilizations,
Mm-hmm.
throughout history that have grown so big and then died, like out of honestly nowhere. And it's like a big war comes in and it wipes all the everything out, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
happens time and time again. It happened throughout history so many times where they can see like Atlantis, they can figure out where that exactly was, that city, and
Mm-hmm.
how that happened. And in Egypt too, it's like we obviously know Egypt was super technologically advanced. We don't know exactly how advanced, but we
Mm-hmm.
have theories. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just like what happened there if they were that technology, if they had that much knowledge.
Right.
It's like did another species like us come down and like either like, oh hey you guys, great, you did the good job here on Earth, let's take you back home, or did another alien species come and wipe them out, or you know what I mean?
Very. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just interesting because there's a lot of you can go into so many rabbit holes with like that.
Definitely. Definitely. Okay, so I just wanted to make a little side comment in here and kind of do like a proper outro. Um, so I'm editing all of this, and we did split it into two parts because we knew it was running long. And now that I'm looking into it, it is still incredibly long, even part one. So I'm just gonna like cut it off here. Just gonna kind of have the outro. We each kind of sort of had one. Austin's kind of goes throughout kind of the whole thing. It's almost like one giant interconnected theory.
but it felt rude for me to just cut off after mine. So I think we're gonna stop it here. We're kind of before I start into the second part, and we're gonna have that in another video. Thank you so much for watching this far and listening to our ramblings and our theories, and I just appreciate you so much. Thank you all.